Why does that person you claim to love make you feel so restless when they fall silent? Picture this scenario. You're writing a message to someone important to you. You see they've read it, but they don't respond. The silence stretches on. In those minutes, your mind begins constructing scenarios, doubts, fears. You suddenly feel vulnerable, angry, confused. Freud had already understood all of this more than a century ago. According to the father of psychoanalysis, silences in relationships are never accidental. They are open windows into the unconscious, signals of inner conflicts that the person cannot or will not face consciously. Every silence tells a story of fear, of control, of repressed desires. Today you'll discover 6 hidden signals that Freud would have recognized immediately in the silent behaviors of people around you. Signals that reveal deep truths about their feelings, their intentions, their unresolved traumas. If you want to continue exploring the most hidden secrets of human behavior, subscribe to the channel. The first signal we're about to analyze could completely change how you interpret relationships in your life. The first signal Freud would recognize immediately is systematic silence in the face of specific topics. Imagine that every time you try to talk about the future of your relationship, the person changes the subject, becomes vague, or simply stops responding. This isn't distraction. It's a defense mechanism deeply rooted in the unconscious. Freud called this process repression. The human mind, to protect itself from anxiety and pain, pushes into the unconscious all those thoughts and feelings it considers too threatening to face consciously. When someone systematically avoids certain topics through silence, they're implementing a primitive but effective defense. The person isn't necessarily aware of what they're doing. Their unconscious has identified that topic as a zone of emotional danger. Perhaps talking about the future means confronting the fear of commitment, or the terror of abandonment, or the feeling of not being worthy of expectations. Silence then becomes a safe refuge. But there's an even more subtle aspect that Freud would have noticed. This type of silence is never neutral. It's charged with tension. You can perceive it in the air, in gestures, in evasive glances. Emotional energy doesn't simply disappear because it's repressed. It manifests in other ways. Sudden irritability, excessive distractions, seemingly inexplicable mood changes. This defense mechanism, according to Freud, often forms in childhood. A child who has learned that expressing certain needs or emotions leads to painful consequences develops the tendency to automatically remove everything that might generate conflict. As an adult, this strategy resurfaces in intimate relationships. The key to recognizing this signal isn't just in what gets avoided, but in how. Observe body language when you propose certain topics. Breathing becoming more shallow, gaze shifting, shoulders stiffening. The unconscious always communicates, even when the conscious mind has decided to remain silent. Have you ever noticed this pattern in someone close to you? That moment when a person closes up like a hedgehog in the face of specific topics. Recognizing this signal allows you to understand that behind that silence there isn't indifference, but a deep vulnerability seeking protection. In the next chapter, you'll discover how silence can transform into a weapon of psychological control, a mechanism that Freud directly connected to repressed power needs in the unconscious. The second signal Freud would recognize is silence used as an instrument of power and emotional control. Imagine this situation. After a fight or disagreement, the person completely stops communicating with you. They don't just avoid the topic of conflict, but ignore you entirely. They leave you in a state of anxiety and uncertainty, forcing you to make the first move, to apologize, to seek their attention. This isn't passive silence. It's active manipulation. Freud had intuited that behind this behavior hides what he called passive aggression. The individual has learned that direct aggression isn't acceptable or effective, so they channel it through omission, withdrawal, punitive silence. It's a sophisticated way of exercising control without taking responsibility for the aggression. The unconscious of this person has developed a perverse but effective strategy, using the void of communication as a weapon. Silence becomes a way to say, "I'm punishing you," without saying it explicitly. It's a form of aggression that keeps the person safe from direct confrontations, but that exercises devastating psychological power over those who suffer it. Freud connected this behavior to childhood experiences of powerlessness. A child who felt overwhelmed or controlled can develop as an adult the unconscious compulsion to reverse the roles. Silence becomes their way of saying, "Now it's your turn to feel what I felt. Now you're the one who has no control over the situation." The psychological mechanism that activates is projection. The person projects onto the other their feelings of frustration, abandonment, powerlessness, using silence as the vehicle. They're not aware of doing this, but the effect is devastating. Those who suffer this treatment find themselves trapped in an emotional loop of anxiety, guilt, need for repair. A crucial aspect that Freud would have highlighted is the temporal element. This type of silence always has a calculated duration, even if unconsciously. It's not infinite. It lasts exactly long enough to obtain the desired effect. When the other has sufficiently paid through anxiety and submission, communication resumes, often as if nothing had happened. You can recognize this signal by observing the pattern. Silence always arrives after moments when the person felt threatened in their sense of control. It's not a spontaneous emotional reaction, but a well-structured, unconscious strategy. The person may seem calm, even superior during these episodes, because they're unconsciously enjoying the power they exercise. The fundamental difference from the defense mechanism of the first chapter is unconscious intentionality. Here, silence doesn't protect the person from something painful. On the contrary, it's used to inflict psychological pain on the other. Have you ever lived this dynamic? That sense of walking on eggshells, of always having to make the first step, of feeling guilty without knowing exactly why. In the next chapter, we'll explore an even more subtle signal: how silence can reveal an internal struggle between desire and fear, a conflict that Freud called ambivalence. The third signal Freud would recognize immediately is silence born from ambivalence. The coexistence of opposite feelings toward the same person or situation. Imagine someone who seeks you out, writes to you, seems to desire your presence, but then when you offer them what they seem to want, they become silent, distant, almost elusive. It's as if part of them wants you close and another part pushes you away. This isn't simple indecision, it's a deep conflict in the unconscious. Freud had theorized that we all carry contradictory feelings towards significant people inside us. Love and hate, desire and fear, attachment and need for freedom can coexist simultaneously in the human psyche. When these opposite feelings are too intense to be consciously integrated, the person enters a state of emotional paralysis that manifests through ambivalent silence. The underlying psychological mechanism is complex. The person's unconscious recognizes that getting too close means risking being hurt, controlled, or losing their own identity. But moving too far away means giving up the love, connection, security that relationship could offer. The result is a constant movement of approach and withdrawal, with silence serving as a transition zone. This type of silence has specific characteristics that Freud would have recognized. It's intermittent and unpredictable. The person can be communicative and present for days, then suddenly close off without apparent external reasons. Silence arrives precisely in moments of greatest intimacy or connection, as if an internal alarm goes off. The difference from other types of silence is that here there's no coherent, unconscious strategy. It's not pure defense nor pure control. It's internal chaos. The person is literally torn between opposite impulses, and silence becomes the only possible response when they can't choose between them. Freud often connected this pattern to childhood experiences of inconsistent attachment. A child who lived relationships where love and rejection alternated unpredictably develops a conflicted internal model. As an adult, they replicate this pattern. They intensely desire closeness, but when they obtain it, the anxiety of future abandonment becomes so strong it pushes them to create preventive distance. Ambivalent silence has a particular energetic quality. It's charged with tension, but not aggressive like in control, nor protective like in defense. It's tormented silence, often accompanied by signs of physical stress, disturbed sleep, appetite changes, restlessness. An aspect Freud would have emphasized is that the person living this ambivalence often isn't aware of the contradiction. They may rationalize their behavior with logical explanations, but the true cause is this unconscious conflict between different parts of themselves that want opposite things. You can recognize this signal by observing cycles, periods of closeness followed by silent withdrawals, without clear triggering events. It's as if the person follows an internal rhythm they're not aware of. Have you ever met someone who seemed to want and flee your love at the same time? That feeling of never being able to understand where you stand with that person. In the next chapter, you'll discover how silence can be used to unconsciously test the solidity of a relationship, a mechanism Freud called compulsive repetition. The fourth signal Freud would recognize is silence used as an unconscious test to verify if the other will abandon us, just as happened in the past. Imagine a person who periodically withdraws into prolonged silences, not because they're angry or want to control you, but as if they're waiting to see what you'll do. It's as if they're unconsciously telling you, "Here, now that I'm not talking to you anymore, will you leave me too? Will you abandon me like the others did?" Freud called this mechanism compulsion to repeat. The human unconscious has a paradoxical tendency to recreate painful situations from the past, in the unconscious attempt to resolve them or confirm their deepest convictions. When someone has experienced significant abandonments, they often develop the compulsion to test every new important relationship through behaviors that could provoke precisely the abandonment they fear. Silence becomes, in this case, a verification tool. The person isn't conscious of what they're doing, but their unconscious orchestrates a sort of emotional experiment. If I stop communicating, if I become distant, if I become hard to reach, will this person still stay or will they leave? This pattern has deep roots in early childhood. Freud had observed that children who experience traumatic separations or emotional abandonments develop what he called separation anxiety. As adults, this anxiety transforms into a compulsive need to continuously test the solidity of effective bonds. The mechanism is cruel in its effectiveness. By creating distance through silence, the person puts the other in a difficult position. If the other insists and tries to maintain contact, this confirms that maybe this time is different. If instead the other gets tired and moves away, this confirms the deep conviction that everyone eventually leaves. And an aspect Freud would have emphasized is the obsessive quality of this behavior. It's not a test done just once. It's a pattern that repeats cyclically in the relationship. Every time the connection deepens, the testing mechanism kicks in. It's as if the unconscious said, "Now that things are getting serious, let's see if you can handle it." The silence test has specific characteristics. It often arrives after moments of particular closeness or intimacy. It's preceded by signs of growing anxiety in the person, which can manifest with irritability, insomnia, or a general feeling of vulnerability. The silence itself has a waiting quality. It's not closed and definitive, but seems to await a response. The person implementing this mechanism often finds themselves in a contradictory emotional state during the test. Part of them hopes the other passes the test and proves to be different from those who abandoned them in the past. Another part prepares for the pain of yet another confirmation that love doesn't last. Freud had noticed that this type of behavior can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Continuously testing the relationship through silence can actually push the other to get tired and leave, thus confirming the person's original fears. You can recognize this signal by timing. Silences arrive precisely when the relationship is becoming deeper or more stable. It's as if there's an internal saboteur who can't believe that this time could go differently. Have you ever felt that someone was testing you through their silences, as if you had to continuously prove your loyalty and commitment? In the next chapter, we'll explore an even deeper signal: how silence can be the manifestation of unprocessed traumas seeking to communicate without words. The fifth signal Freud would recognize immediately is silence born from traumas so deep that the mind cannot translate them into words. Imagine a person who at certain moments becomes completely unreachable, as if they retreat into an internal world where you cannot follow them. They're not angry, they're not testing you, they're not manipulating you, they're simply elsewhere. It's as if part of them remained trapped in a time and place they can no longer leave. Freud had discovered that some experiences are so traumatic that the psyche cannot integrate them into normal memory. These memories remain as unprocessed fragments in the unconscious and periodically emerge in the form of symptoms, including total communicative withdrawal. The person doesn't consciously choose silence. It's the trauma that temporarily renders them incapable of connecting with the present. This type of silence has unique qualities that distinguish it from all others. It's not strategic, it's not defensive in the classic sense, it's not manipulative, it's dissociative. The person seems physically present but emotionally absent, as if their consciousness had temporarily disconnected from the here and now to protect them from something intolerable. Freud called this phenomenon hysterical conversion. The psychic energy of unprocessed trauma converts into physical or behavioral symptoms. Silence becomes the symptom through which the unconscious seeks to protect consciousness from memories or sensations too painful to be faced directly. The most distinctive characteristic of this silence is its distorted temporal quality. The person can remain in this state for hours, days, or even weeks, and when they emerge, they often don't have full awareness of how much time has passed or how their behavior was perceived by others. It's as if they had traveled in a parallel dimension of time. During these episodes, you can observe specific physical signs that Freud had learned to recognize: staring into the void, altered breathing, muscle rigidity, sometimes subtle tremors. The body is literally reliving the imprint of trauma, even if the conscious mind doesn't have access to specific memories. A fundamental aspect Freud emphasized is that this type of silence isn't voluntary. The person cannot simply decide to get out of it, just as they cannot decide to enter it. It's governed by unconscious mechanisms that activate when present stimuli resonate with past wounds. Unprocessed trauma creates what Freud called coercive repetition. The unconscious continues to repropose the traumatic situation through silence, in the desperate attempt to find a resolution that never comes. It's as if the psyche said, maybe this time, if I relive the pain, I'll manage to understand it and overcome it. This silence often accompanies a feeling of powerlessness in those who observe it. There's nothing you can say or do to reach the person in that moment. Every attempt at communication bounces off an invisible wall. The only possible thing is to wait for the internal storm to calm down. Freud had noticed that these episodes often have specific but hidden triggers: a scent, a sound, a situation that unconsciously reminds of the original trauma. The person themselves might not realize the connection, experiencing silence as something that happens to them without apparent reason. Have you ever met someone who seemed to suddenly disappear emotionally, even though they were physically present? That sense of powerlessness in not being able to reach them, whatever you did. In our last chapter, you'll discover the most subtle and revealing signal: how silence can be an act of distorted love, an unconscious way to protect the other from one's own internal pain. The sixth and final signal Freud would recognize is the most paradoxical: silence used as an act of distorted love to protect the other from one's own internal pain. Imagine a person who withdraws into silence precisely when they're going through the most difficult moment of their life. They don't seek your support, don't share their pain, don't allow you to be close. They leave you out, but not out of malice or manipulation. They do it because they love you so much, they don't want to contaminate you with their suffering. Freud had identified in this behavior a complex form of what he called pathological altruism. The person's unconscious has developed the conviction that their own pain, their own problems, their own vulnerabilities are toxic to others. Silence then becomes a sacrificial act. I protect you from myself, even if this means feeling bad alone. This mechanism often originates in family dynamics, where the child learned that expressing needs or pain caused stress in significant adults. They develop the deep conviction that to be loved, they must be strong, self-sufficient, never a burden to others. As an adult, this conviction transforms into a form of distorted protection. They isolate themselves in silence every time they don't feel emotionally presentable. The unique quality of this silence is its painful gentleness. It's not cold or punitive, but charged with deep sadness. The person suffers for the silence they impose on themselves, but is convinced it's the only right thing to do. It's as if they said, "I love you too much to let my pain touch you." Freud had observed that this pattern reveals an infantile conception of love. The person never learned that true intimacy also includes sharing pain, that being loved also means being able to be vulnerable without fear of rejection. They instead learned that love must be earned through strength and emotional independence. The cruel paradox of this mechanism is that it achieves the opposite effect to what's desired. Instead of protecting the relationship, protective silence often damages it. The other feels excluded, rejected, not important enough to share difficult moments. Emotional distance is created precisely in the attempt to preserve closeness. During these episodes, you can notice specific signals. The person seems to carry an invisible weight. Glances are charged with affection, but also distance. There's a quality of sacrifice in their behavior. It's as if they're doing something that costs them a lot, but that they consider necessary. An aspect Freud emphasized is the element of hidden control in this behavior. Protecting the other through silence is also a way of controlling the intimacy of the relationship, unilaterally deciding what the other can or cannot know, live, share. This type of silence often intensifies precisely in moments when the relationship could deepen through sharing difficulties. It's as if the person was afraid that showing their wounds could destroy the image the other has of them. The underlying unconscious conviction is devastating. If you saw how broken I am inside, you couldn't love me anymore. Silence then becomes the last line of defense to preserve the other's love, even at the price of never being able to truly receive it in its completeness. Have you ever loved someone who protected you from their pain through silence? That frustrating feeling of wanting to be present for a person who doesn't allow you to, convinced they're doing you a favor. Recognizing this signal is fundamental because it allows you to understand that silence isn't rejection. It's frightened love that doesn't know how to express itself without risking losing itself. Every silence tells a deep story of the human soul. Freud taught us that nothing in the psyche is accidental. Behind every apparently inexplicable behavior hides a perfect, painful, but understandable unconscious logic. The real question now is, which of these silences do you recognize in your life? And above all, are you ready to respond with compassion instead of judgment? If this journey into the unconscious has struck you, write in the comments from which city you're watching this video. Hit like, subscribe to the channel to explore other mysteries of the human psyche, and share this content with those you love. They too deserve to understand the hidden languages of the heart. Thank you for being part of this community of researchers of the human soul. Together, we're learning to decipher the deepest codes of relationships. See you in the next journey into the depths of the human mind.